Hi everybody, Chloé Duplessis here with Duplessis Art. I'm an artist, a culture bearer, and a historian whose work centers and honors history, accessibility, and healing. And I'm coming to you from the Oz Gallery, the site of my latest show. And the show is called Blind Spot, and it's meant to reference not only the fact that I'm navigating vision loss and eventual blindness because I have Stargardt disease, a very rare genetic form of macular degeneration, but it also is meant to represent what I feel we open ourselves up to when we ignore privilege. Now, over the past 3 years, we've traveled extensively with the art shows that we've created, and I mean we as in Duplessis Art, me, my husband Sean, who is our project manager and installs all of my shows after I create the work. And in our travels, we have encountered a lot of people who pose the question, does privilege even really exist? And to that, I say, the mere fact that you can ask that question confirms that privilege does indeed exist. If you are able to rest at night in your bed without fear of people intruding your home and taking your life, if you're able to rise in the morning and travel to work or school or another location without fear of coming back safe and in one piece, if you can go into a financial institution and be assured that you will receive the highest quality of customer service, support, and consideration for financial assistance, loans, etc. And if you can put on a suit and go into a job interview and trust that you will receive priority in terms of acceptance, compensation, and benefits, then you are in you're in the majority, not just in the sense that you are in the majority, but you're in the majority in this country, our country. And you, through no fault of your own, are the benefit of privilege. So what I'd like to do is, first and foremost, I want to thank the Oz Gallery, the city of Thornton, for the opportunity to show my work here. Blind Spot will be available for viewing through March 24th, 2023. So you have the opportunity Tuesday through Friday to come in to see the work, to experience it right here in person. Additionally, if you'd like to have a private tour, simply reach out to me online through duplessisart.com or contact our studio at the number listed on our website for those tours. I'm going to turn the camera around so we can begin this virtual tour, and I'll share with you an overview of the pieces represented in this show that means so much to me. Thank you for your time, for your intention, and thanks to all the people who made the trip out on that cold night to experience here in person Blind Spot. All right, you guys, let's go. So the very first piece is called Blind Spot. I know. So this piece is a representation of what it looks like for me on any given day. When you have Stargardt disease, sometimes you will see halos, images, shadows, or even bright sparks of light. And the reason that you see the bright sparks of light is because your nerves in your eye are trying desperately to reconnect, or they're dying. Stargardt directly affects your central vision. So you lose cells. And when you do, this is how it can appear. Now, I thought it was timely and important to start the show with this piece because I wanted people to connect to a little bit of my journey as a person navigating disability. I also want people to make the connection between what it's like to have outside energies and entities threaten your well-being and your peace of mind. And that's what privilege, racism, and discrimination directly do. At the very bottom of the piece, you will see a beautiful piece I created on site. Every time I do a show, I always have a piece that I create directly on site during the installation, and that's to honor the energy and the intention of the space where we're showing our work. So when you come to the gallery, if you're in the Denver metro area, I'd like for you to stop right here at the gratitude basket, take out a piece of paper and pen, and write down something that you are looking forward to releasing. And on the opposite side, I'd like for you to write something you'd like to pray, wish, or usher into this new season for your life. It could be personal or professional. It's totally up to you. Be mindful that names are not required. This is confidential. And at the end of each day at the gallery, they will dispose of these pieces of paper. It's meant to serve as a reminder of our power and our capacity to release things and to usher in new seasons. Just like this exhibition, hopefully, will encourage people to begin to shed or release old ideas and identities that no longer serve us as a people and that are less than progressive. The second piece in the show is called Oh Say Can You See? This is a fabric piece that was created using purchased and ancestral fabric. So when I travel, one of the ways that I connect to the culture is I go looking for fabric, or I ask the elders in the community to gift me some of their fabric. And I feel that that makes the pieces so much richer because of the connection, because of the story behind them, and because of their origin. Now, on this side of the piece, this bandana and the gingham, those are consistent in my work, and they represent the old ideology that is repressive and regressive and does not allow for everyone to breathe, to live, to be, or exist. The blue pieces of fabric represent a more progressive, more liberal, and inclusive viewpoint that allows for us to honor everyone. Now, in all of my pieces, you will see I'm all about the layers and the levels. Pieces of African fabric from my travels, pieces from the Caribbean, and you will always see twine. The twine is meant to represent our beautiful indigenous sisters and brothers who are often overlooked. And the African fabric is meant to represent enslaved peoples that were largely the foundation of our country. The next piece is called Turn Down Your Privilege. So when the pandemic started, one of the things that I really got into was listening to audiobooks, podcasts, seminars online, like many of us. But what I found interesting was no matter what I was listening to, even if it was for people of color, unless it was a project that they directly created, all the voices were Eurocentric, or they were the voices of Caucasian people for the most part. Now, I am here for everyone's voice. Absolutely. But I think that things that are celebrating, representing, or honoring people of color should give us the option of hearing from people of color. Turn down your privilege. The very next piece is called Brown Battles. For many persons of color, we've actually internalized a lot of the residue from generational trauma and slavery and the slave trade, even all these years later. So much so that it represents itself in colorism. So there are lots of battles that we actually face and navigate as people of color, whether it encourages people to lighten their skin, to straighten their hair, or to alter their bodies to embrace a Eurocentric standard. It's deeply ingrained and can be highly problematic, particularly for young children, navigating this journey and trying to find their own way and voice. Now, there's nothing wrong with having a variety of types of hair, textures, energies, or if you are multiracial or biracial, definitely you have your own beauty that you're bringing to the table. But for persons who have more of a ethnic, African, or indigenous appearance, they should be embraced as well. Brown Battles. This piece was a photograph that was incorporated into a collage. I distressed the boxing gloves and then added the Jim Crow sign to complete the piece. These bronzed shoes are meant to represent the physical presence of Ahmaud Arbery and all the persons who simply wanted to walk, jog, or run, who wanted to connect with nature, who wanted to move freely. And while most of us know about the story that is the tragedy of Ahmaud Arbery, there are countless nameless persons throughout history who have not been acknowledged. About 2 years ago, when the tragedy of Ahmaud Arbery was broadcast on my television, as someone who loves to walk in the morning, I was terrified to walk in the morning. And when I began to give voice to this, a lot of my friends felt the very same way. And it wasn't until that point in time that I acknowledged that the notion of leaving your home, being able to walk safely and navigate through life without fear of harm, is indeed a privilege that is not necessarily afforded to persons of color or to women. And this piece is called All God's Children Got Shoes. It's a reference to the what? Yes, you guessed it. The old Negro spiritual of the same name. The next piece is called Clotilda. So Clotilda is very near and dear to my heart because it references the last documented slave ship that went to Africa, gathered slaves, and brought them back to the U.S. And it's based upon a bet, believe it or not. A wealthy gentleman bet a colleague that he couldn't take a boat, ship rather, and go to Africa, collect people, kidnap people rather, and bring them back to the U.S. And to prove him wrong, this gentleman did. Now, growing up, this was always kind of like myth or rumor or, one of those folk tales. But it wasn't until about 2 years ago, 2019, I believe, that they actually found the remains of the Clotilda, I believe outside of Alabama or Mississippi. And Africatown, which is an actual town inhabited by the descendants of the Clotilda, is a real thing. So as a person of color, it really just broke my heart, frankly, to hear about how little people value the quality of life or the existence of people of color. A bet. Because of a bet, people's lives were changed for generations to come. Privilege. Next piece is called Welcome. Welcome is a significant piece that was originally offered for my Negro Story show, and that was a nationally ranked show that actually debuted 2 years ago this month in Denver and then traveled the country. I decided to include this piece in this show just because I felt it added to the depth and the layers of the show. And of course, there is no Jim Crow sign, to my knowledge, on the bottom of the Statue of Liberty. But for many people of color, oftentimes it feels like, this is how it feels, frankly. There are no words. And that Jim Crow sign is an actual sign. It's not a remake or something that I created or crafted. I found this sign, and it actually is sourced back to Georgia about 40 years ago. This piece is called Welcome. So if you happen to know the story of the Statue of Liberty, then more than likely you grew up with this notion of the story representing a welcoming beacon of light and support for persons who were immigrants. And while that's a great story, guess what? It's not the truth, not the whole truth. The Statue of Liberty was originally a way for French artists and abolitionists to encourage the U.S. to move away from the enslavement of African peoples. In 2019, the Washington Post released an article that documents this story. So as someone who has always loved the Statue of Liberty, like literally loved the Statue of Liberty, I was loving the toga action, the height, like all the things. The sister was bad. I grew up loving her because of what she represented. Liberty, hope, freedom, all the things. And she was tall, and I'm tall. So imagine my surprise when, literally 2 years ago, I hear about this article talking about the actual origin of the statue and talking about how the model for the statue was a woman of color. Now, you may ask yourself, how did the story shift? Well, like many things in the creative world, people have great ideas and energies and opportunities to show up. I had to think about that one. But they often lack funding. So the people who had the funding to fund a statue of this scope and magnitude just happened to have ties to slavery. It was the source and supplier of their wealth. So clearly they weren't in alignment with creating a statue that promoting a message that was in direct contradiction to their journey. And so they finally said, if we're going to do this, then the story or the narrative has to change. And thus, it was born. The story that we've all been fed for years and years and years. This got me to thinking about how many things that we have been taught or have been conditioned to believe or learn over the years that are not based in truth. And while that can be challenging and problematic, it also brings me a little bit of joy because it means that we are living history and we are creating this. Whenever we find something that is not in alignment with what is true, we can choose to respectfully resist it. The next piece is called the weathering chair. For many people of color, we internalize a lot of our challenges, the discrimination, the microaggressions, all of those things. Because frankly, if we give voice to every single thing that's going on in our day, we'll never get anything done. It's just the truth of the matter. A few years ago, I was reading a study about the term weathering. Now, weathering basically means that based upon the difficulties that you face in life or your trauma, it will age and can age your body, your physical being, affect your mental mindset, and even age your organs. There are several studies at this point that have been done about this. It affects persons navigating disability, persons who are navigating natural disasters, but it also has and is affecting people of color. So if you are in your 40s and you're a person of color and your life has been exceptionally traumatic or challenging, it's likely that your organs could be about 60. It also directly affects any pre-existing conditions you may potentially have. The weathering chair. Now, the fabric used in the weathering chair is actually fabric from my travels, again, consistent with the fabric used in the fabric pieces for continuity of show. The next piece is called sidewalks. Now, where I'm from, it is very common to walk down the street and to see someone who is Caucasian walking towards you and to not have the expectation, truly, that they will move or get over for you. Now, sometimes they do, but it's rare. The expectation is that you will move, and has been for years. Even if it means that you have to step into the street, into a puddle, into snow, into the elements to ensure that their stride is continued. This has happened to me on a personal basis as a young woman working downtown in my hometown of Shreveport. It's happened here in Denver There's really nowhere that I've ever been as a woman of color and as someone of significant height and stature that I've not experienced this situation. I guess that's a good term for it. It's a situation. And when I spoke to other persons of color, they shared this sentiment. They too understood what a sidewalk story was. And they were blown away that other people weren't aware of this as well. Now, my Caucasian friends were completely surprised. They'd never heard of this, and it caused them to pause and reflect. I remember walking down the street and having someone walk directly into me and having the person look at me startled and say, "Why didn't you move?" Not, "Are you okay? I apologize," but "Why didn't you move?" And I in turn asked them, "Why didn't you move?" To which they replied, "I did not see you." Now I am 6'1" and about 300 pounds, so that's not a likely story. And for years, it gave me pause until I realized that they were telling the truth. They didn't see me. This piece is called About Face. This is to document the appropriation of Black culture. Black culture is big business. The music, the fashion, the flavor of the food. It's culture. It is culture. We set trends. We break records. We encourage. We create a quality of life that is unparalleled in many circumstances and avenues. But how often are people of color the recipients of the financial support and proceeds from these industries, these ideas, these cultural traditions? About face. That's the piece. Now, in all of my shows, there will always be a piece or two honoring an extraordinary woman of color. And this piece is for Harriet Tubman, abolitionist, leader, military professional, just all out extraordinary human being. Harriet Tubman has inspired me since I was a little girl. So I wanted to create a piece that honored her energy, her capacity, her sheer determination. The next piece is called Have a Seat. And as you can see, an empty table is directly positioned beneath our flag. There is no food on the table and no one is sitting down. And it's meant to represent this notion that until we all have a seat at the table, no one has a seat at the table. Safe spaces. This piece is one that I featured originally in my Negro Stories show 2 years ago. I wanted to include it because I thought it was just as relevant now, today, as it was when I originally released it. So during the pandemic, I kept coming in contact with people online or by phone who were just having a tough time, frankly. And while my time wasn't as tough as many others, because due to my visual disability, I was already in the house, my work was already online, and I had not driven in about a year or so. But it was still challenging because we didn't know what this thing was. We didn't know what COVID was going to do. What turned out to be, 2 years was originally supposed to be just 2 or 3 weeks, right? So I shared with a friend that as a mom who was working from home with a small toddler, that the only place I felt safe and comfortable to cry, to think, to mull things over was our shower. And then she began to talk about how her space was doing laundry in their basement. And then another friend commented about crying in her car to music. And we were all laughing hysterically by the end of the conversation because it occurred to us that we were from all different backgrounds and ethnic groups and experiences. But one thing was consistent. It's the human experience. And we all deserve to have safe spaces to release. Energy has to flow. And that's what this piece is about. Safe spaces. Now, this fabric piece is my favorite piece right now. It really is. It's called 1877 because that is the year that this atrocity took place. Now, during Reconstruction in the South, over 6,500 people are recorded to have been lynched. Now, you and I both know that more than likely that number pales in comparison to the actual number because there were so many things that were not recorded or documented during that time. But in 1877, believe it or not, in the parish that I was born in, Caddo Parish, it's documented that on one day, 20 people lost their lives. 20 people were lynched. Why? Well, they were lynched because people wanted to send a message that if you were going to vote, you better be prepared for this outcome. So they were offered the right to vote, of course, through the legislation that was passed, and then they decided to exercise their right to vote. And in an effort to discourage them from actually voting, the powers that be said, you can't vote in this parish. You'll have to vote in another parish that was approximately 45 minutes to an hour away, walking or on a carriage or buggy. So 20 people, well-meaning citizens, got dressed up, said goodbye to their families, and made the trek to the other parish to vote. They never returned. On that day, in an effort to send a message loud and clear that you are not a citizen, you are not welcome, you are not equal, 20 people were lynched. So in this piece, each gentle knot of rope is to honor those persons. You are not nameless and faceless. You have value. And if you actually count the piece, you will find that there are 21 pieces of rope. And that includes the viewer, because I fundamentally feel that if you view an atrocity, you are now connected to it, and you have the opportunity to shift your energy to ensure that this never happens again. 1877. The next piece is called Walk on My Faith. This piece represents the long road that we walk as women. If you're born with ovaries, then chances are you are in a society that wants you to be shiny and new in all things, but also wants you to work as expressed by the denim, which was originally created to be workers' material. And of course, it's on the backdrop of the gingham, which represents extreme oppression. That is the foundation of many of our systems. And of course, the braces on her legs represent the constraints of what it means to live in a society that is still deciding in 2023 whether or not it's a good idea for women to earn equal pay for equal work. This piece is called Bootstrapping, and this is to honor the persons of color that walked for almost 2 years barefoot to New Mexico to start a city, one of the first cities in New Mexico to have a postal system, to have a bank, to have schools. So whenever there are days where I'm just feeling like I can't make it through, I think about this piece and those people and what kind of capacity and determination you must have had to endure that walk. This piece is a piece from the Negro Stories collection that I thought would add depth and perspective to the show. And it's called Road Trip. And it's actually from a good friend of mine who is Caucasian. And she referenced a season in her life where she was riding in a car with two friends from school, and her father was driving. And in an effort to connect with her friends, he shared a racist joke. They were not amused, nor was she, and it really got her to thinking about how people of color could be used as fodder or entertainment or connecting material for tough situations and how their lives were minimized. And it really started her on a journey for focused inclusion and consideration that continues to this day. Road trip. Also in this piece, you'll see the layering of different elements that represent the American journey. What's more iconic and idyllic than an American car? Of course, you see the sugarcane in the background, and then you have the American flag that I use often in my pieces, the flag that dates back to 1863. And of course, I created a license plate that says whites only that actually came from an actual Jim Crow sign. Currently in our country, African American women are incarcerated at horrendous levels for nonviolent crime. Many of these women are actually giving birth behind bars, trying to navigate systems, trying to still support their families in this challenging space. This piece is a commentary on such, and it's called Building Blocks. It's a digital cube piece that literally started with a tiny cube about this big that was expanded to create the flag and the woman. In 2020, the inquiries online for Black Afrofuturism, Black Afrofuturist writers, themes, and ideas skyrocketed. Why? Because our everyday was so tumultuous and so traumatic. Many people of color were just trying to find ways to connect, to feel supported, and to escape. So this piece is called Black to the Future, or For Octavia. At this point, we will transition to the opposite side of the gallery. And here you will see one of my ancestral wreaths. I love making these wreaths. I use the fabric I've sourced in my travels, along with a lot of raw materials. If you'd like to order one, just reach out to me. And I usually create them for persons who have lost persons. So for instance, a loved one has transitioned. We'll use their favorite shirt or something that was of value to them. Maybe they're a fan of a sports team, or it just depends on what has value for them. I also gift them to collectors and to friends alike. So I just wanted to dress this woman and really set the tone for this second wall, because this wall is all about the ladies. So this first piece is called Brown Bag. So if you're familiar with what the brown bag represents to many people of color, then this will come as no surprise to you. But if you are not, get ready. So growing up, I'd heard often about brown bags and the role that they played in people choosing suitable mates to build families with. Many, many years ago, and sadly, some places here today, the brown bag was actually used to approve someone's mate. Simply put, if you were lighter than a brown bag, then it was all good. Good luck. If you were darker than a brown bag, then you're on your own. You would even be discouraged from marrying this person and starting a family with them for fear that your children, your offspring, may be of a darker hue and have a more challenging life. Now, this happened a lot in the South and also in various pockets across the country where people from the South traveled and relocated after Reconstruction. And for many people, this has been a really big part of their reality. And they're actually choosing mates still to this day based upon the stigma originally referenced in Brown Battles, the piece on the other wall. The residue of slavery and oppression is so deeply ingrained that all these years later, some people will literally choose a life mate based upon the melanin or lack thereof in their skin. A few months ago, suddenly, my stepfather passed away. And his sudden passing left a void in our family and shook us to our very core. James Stanley Sullivan was a very kind, loving, dutiful man. He was a veteran. He was a hard worker, a dutiful father, grandfather, and husband to my lovely mother, Carolyn Jones Sullivan. And when he transitioned, it really got me thinking about how fleeting life is, but how beautiful this time could be if we allowed ourselves to mourn and process, and to do so in a way that ensures his energy and the energy of all of our loved ones remains with us. And by that, I mean energy is neither created nor destroyed. This is scientific law. So I feel that our people, grandparents, parents, loved ones, even pets, their energy is always with us. When I look at my daughter Zoe, who's now 6, in her face, I see her grandfather in her nose. I see ancestors in her cheekbones. It's literally in her being, in her DNA, her very cells. And that brings me such joy. The people we love that transition are never gone. They've simply changed form. And I fundamentally believe that one day we'll all be together again. So I painted this piece to honor the ancestors and to honor their spirit. This piece is called Every Time I Feel the Spirit, acrylic on canvas. It took me 3 days to complete, and there are 7 layers of paint that were used to create this joyful and hopeful scene. The next piece is one of my faves, not necessarily because of the bright and amplified vision of womanhood it is, although I do appreciate that, but because this piece is in recognition of Sarah Bartman. So if you're unfamiliar with Sarah Bartman, I encourage you to Google her, but I also encourage you not to plan anything after that because it's going to be a doozy for you. Hopefully. If it's not, then there are some other things you might want to look into. So Sarah Bartman was actually kidnapped from South Africa many years ago. And the kidnappers happened to be persons who were colonizers of European descent. They did so because they were so obsessed and intrigued by her figure, specifically her rear. So this woman was captured and made to don costumes and do dances on a vaudevillesque, carnivalesque circuit across Europe. People would come, pay their money, watch her, observe her, cheer, boo, all the things. She had a very challenging life. She was sold from person to person. And after she passed, in her mid-20s no less, Sarah was not allowed to go home. And by that I mean her lower region was studied by various institutes of higher learning and labs in France. It wasn't until literally almost a decade ago, give or take, that her remains were actually released to come home to her native land for rest. Her lower region was literally on display for a number of years after her passing. Sarah Baartman, you may have had a tumultuous life that you did not deserve, but I want you to know that your legacy, your life, has value. And we honor you through this show. Every human needs to know the story of Sarah Baartman. In keeping with the theme of appropriation and positioning, this piece is called The Offering. And it's called The Offering because Sarah Baartman's story and the story of other women of color who have been willfully depreciated in campaigns and media stories and movements, often with no additional support gain for their family, for their friends, for their descendants. Think Henrietta Lacks. These women have made the ultimate offering. So I am often in a space where I am shaking my head at the younger generation because many of these young women, unfortunately, are coming up in an age where this is the norm and they feel that their bodies are their only offering. And we know this is not the truth. They are extraordinary by design. Their capacity is deep, and that they can literally shift energy, time, and culture simply by owning their own space. The Offering. Now, when I was growing up in Louisiana as a little girl, there used to be a number of ladies always at the bus stop, honey, or walking down the street on Sunday. And where were they going? They were going to church. This piece is called Sunday Best, and it's one of my favorites. It's an ode to one of my favorite painters, Clementine Hunter, who grew up on a plantation and is noted for doing beautiful plantation scenes, not celebrating plantation life, but honoring her truth since she grew up on a plantation. And she did not really start painting until she was in her late 70s, I believe. Talk about determination and talk about a second act. So this piece is meant to honor her and all those beautiful Black women who may have had extraordinarily difficult lives during the week, but on Sunday, honey, they were going to put on that dress, or they were going to mend something together and make it shiny and new, and they were going to hold their head up with pride as they got ready to go worship. Because on Sunday, you were not a laborer, even though that work is honorable. You were not someone who was a domestic. On Sunday, you were a deacon, you were a deaconess, you were a worshiper. And there was a simple knowing of this amongst persons of color. Additionally, there was a beautiful dignity that just framed Sundays growing up for me as a kid. Sunday Best. This piece is called Vibrant Voices. It's the third fabric piece in this show. And as you can see, I have beautiful pieces of fabric from my travels. Yes, the African fabric, the fabric from the Caribbean, bright, bold colors and hues. It's meant to represent the notion that if we honor everyone for who they are in their own space, in their own time, dare I say it, we can put something together that's extraordinary. Look how beautiful and rich this piece is. Vibrant voices. Something really cool happens when we allow everyone to show up as our authentic self. The picture is no longer fragmented. It's deeper and richer and more robust than we could ever imagine. The next piece was an on-site installation that we created here in the gallery. It's made from commercial fishing net. Yes, I know. And the fabric used It's traditionally, it feels so soft as the fabric that you would use to mend a blanket to create a sense of warmth and comfort. So about a year ago, I found myself really perplexed about all of the backlash that I experienced online while reading about the new version of Disney's Little Mermaid. Now, I'm 43, so I grew up with the original version of The Little Mermaid, where Ariel is curious and joyful and Caucasian and has red hair. And I loved the original version as a kid. So imagine my joy as a parent when I hear that during the remake, she's being recast as a beautiful young girl of color. Because as a parent of a kid of color, I know that this is going to warm my daughter's heart. And as a historian and culture bearer, I am fully aware of how much representation matters. So, there are 3 things that should be discussed very briefly about this piece and why it was important to do. The first thing is, Ariel is a fictional character. So people who got all in their feelings, honey, about Ariel being black, it really lets me know that there are some other issues they should be tackling. You're really upset about a fictional character not having pale skin? Really? White skin? Like this is a standard for fictional characters? It's ridiculous. Everyone deserves to see themselves in fantasy and see themselves in a fairy tale and to have that kind of connection and release. And as a mom, it really raised the question for me about why certain kids are allowed to have that connection to joy and to fantasy and release, and other children are not necessarily allowed to have that connection. And that was problematic. And lastly, as a historian, because history always makes its way into the story, history is the story, I created that piece behind it. And yes, her outfit is made of burlap, because oppression. If you're a fan of African folklore, then you know that spirit is called Mami Wata, Mamiwata. Look it up. And you also know that persons who lived off the coast of Africa were seafarers. They were fishermen, fisherwomen. They also had a whole set of beliefs and systems and cultural notions, rather, that they embraced and created to support this beautiful notion of their culture. And mermaid, merman, merpeople culture originates in Africa. So from a historical point of view, the Little Mermaid, being a person of color, is not only historically accurate, it just makes for great entertainment, because now you give a whole different group of people the opportunity to connect to fantasy, to connect to a fairy tale, and to connect to that release. And we all deserve to have a release. This piece is called Belle on Bricks. Now, Belle on Bricks is a piece I created literally using tiny cubes. If you see this cube was used to create the hair, the beautiful curly, coily hair of a little girl. There are 87 cubes in this piece. It took me about 3 days to create. And I created this piece after having a conversation with my daughter. She came home one day and she said, "Mommy, is my hair normal?" To which I was like, "I don't know. What do you mean by that?" And she said, "Normal." I said, "Normal? Oh, well, it grows out of your head like that, so it's normal. Why do you ask, Zoe?" She said, "Mommy, because one of my friends at school said, 'Look at your hair. That's not normal. It doesn't look like mine. And as a parent, my heart sank because I knew that it was time to have the talk with my 6-year-old daughter. And by the talk, I mean the conversation that parents of color have to have with their children when they transition into the mainstream systems of the Western world. You will rarely have a child of color walk up to a Caucasian kid or a kid of another ethnic background and ask them if their features, hair, or clothing is normal, but for some reason, this is very commonplace with our children, and it's not okay. And the fact that I have to have this conversation with my young daughter at the age of 6 saddens me, but it also means that parents of kids of other backgrounds and ethnicities should also be having conversations with their children. Conversations that allow for everyone to be respected and valued. This is the second piece in the show that is honoring an extraordinary woman of color. This piece is for Miss Nina Simone. Nina Simone has been an inspiration to me as long as I can remember, and for those who actually are fans of her work, you know that she was very active in the movement for civil rights, for inclusion, and she was light years ahead of her time in terms of her creative work. Thank you, Miss Simone. This piece is called Tightrope. So now that you've seen all of the pieces in the show, and heard some of the stories represented in these pieces, actual accounts of a historical nature or oral histories I've collected over the past 6 months, you at some point will likely feel that navigating the Western world as a person of color may feel on day to day like you're walking a tightrope, trying to balance, trying to normalize different things in your life in a quest for peace and well-being. And while every day is not heavy like this, some days are. This piece is called Tightrope. It's a digital cubist piece. Again, this piece was created using one little square that was elongated, and the woman was created using that technique. The background is 15 different filters used to create a burning, explosive background. I use texture a lot of my work because it allows me to still appreciate the work. If something is really bland or one tone or one level, it's hard for me to see it at this stage of the game. So I love texture because the contrast is still readily visible to me as someone who is losing their vision. And in turn, I think it's a nice little treat for the viewer and collector of my work to have that richness of character and that customization, because all of this is done digitally by hand. There's also movement consistent in the pieces because I create work that has heavier themes, not because that's where I want to dwell, but because that's what the season is calling for. And it's always in the hopes that by having art that sparks kind, intentional conversations, that people will come together around this renewed sense of awareness and really begin to move beyond practicing wokeness, move beyond this notion that we don't see color, because to say that is a lie and dismisses everything that people have been working for in this movement. There's nothing wrong with seeing color. Color and our respective backgrounds and histories are what make us, us. And they're to be honored. Our identities are to be honored. Color is to be honored, and the richness thereof. Speaking of which, this brings us to our final piece. Now this piece is acrylic on canvas, And I painted this piece about a month ago as the final piece for the show. And it's called Wade in the Water. And if you look at the piece, of course, this is meant to be water. Water is fluid and moving. We're born from water. Many situations and seasons, we transition through water. When you give birth, water is involved. Where our bodies are almost all water. Water is life-giving. It's essential to this journey. So I wanted to honor the natural element of water and our connection to it, our closeness to it. But I also wanted to honor the notion that when we begin to see with our whole heart that everyone has value and every story is an important story, we begin to diminish our blind spot, because we all have one. We begin to reduce and dismantle our privilege, because we all have a measure of privilege. And we begin to open our hearts to the notion that maybe we can create a future that will allow everyone to walk together and to be seen and heard. Thank you for joining me for this virtual tour. To schedule a private tour or one-on-one workshop here in the Oz Gallery with Duplessis Art, simply visit our website. To purchase any of the works represented in the show or presented in this virtual tour, simply reach out to me at the studio by phone or send a message on the Contact Us section of duplessisart.com. It's been a joy to share with you. I appreciate your continued support of the work. And I'd like to end this virtual tour with a gentle prayer and a quote. My prayer is that everyone who experiences this work and sees this video will feel supported and safe and be encouraged, and will know that they are never alone, and that by showing up every day with kindness and sincerity of intention for all people, they are moving this thing forward. James Baldwin, one of my longtime inspirations, has a beautiful quote that sums up this exhibition. Neither love nor terror makes one blind. Indifference makes one blind.